If I hurt myself for you, could you please see my pain as something beautiful? Or else I have to admit that it's just pain. Diane is one of the main characters inhabiting the world of Bojack Horseman, a cartoon potently pouring with pessimism and pretty punchy punchlines, and also Mr. Peanut Butter. Within this world, Diane, a Vietnamese-American feminist, finds herself constantly bombarded with the very normal goings-on in Hollywood.
Whoa!
She has always wanted to make her mark on the world, yet the world has made its mark on her by providing constant disappointments from everyone she used to look up to.
You dare. Robert Blake gave me that mug!
Well, sort of. Diane has had a long and pretty complicated history within her time on the show. And by the time the series' 6th and final season comes about, Diane leaves LA, the narrative center of the story, to be with her new boyfriend, and wants to write a book on her life until this point. Only, she's struggling to write that book. In fact, she doesn't write much of anything. An aspiring creative who cannot create for themselves. This is where many artists see themselves in Diane. And today we're going to look at what Diane does that makes this problem so overwhelmingly relatable to so many who just want to do what they love the most, and how that can start to drive us into the darkest of corners.
Hello, I am Diane, and I am a young girl living in Boston, and ever since I was that, I wanted to write good things that were good. This is not good. Fix this later.
The episode Good Damage focuses on Diane's inability to face her past beyond fleeting glimpses when trying to write a book of essays about her life. This episode utilizes some really creative and symbolic animation through this rough, sketchy style used to represent Diane's formation of ideas. The drawings are rough and inconsistently drawn, and rarely take proper shape.
What?
This seems to be partly because of the new antidepressants she started taking, which causes her thoughts to become frazzled and unfocused, and as she writes more and more, her book of essays becomes farther from focus. Diane is a New York Times bestseller, and as we've seen through the timeline of every famous person ever, they don't want to sell out and become old and irrelevant, which in internet time is about 3 weeks old. Tide Pod kids? They are now pensioners. 2018 was 50 years ago.
Time stops for no one.
So Diane puts an insane amount of personal pressure on herself to write something incredible. When Diane has other people competing in her field for the same thing, it only amplifies this competitiveness within herself to uphold this elusively happy bestseller image. But for some reason, Diane can't even bring herself to write the first chapter. Surely this shouldn't be an issue for her. She has a fountain of fascinating follies from the flurry of fancies she's flown through when foraging for the stories of famous faces. The fact I did that second try was actually phenomenal. I'm so proud of myself. When she wrote for Bojack back in the first season, there was little in the way of creative struggles for her to overcome. But when it comes to herself, we get the same blank screen Bojack had when he tried to write for himself all that time ago. I doubt this parallel is accidental. In fact, the show consistently frames Diane and Bojack as very similar people, which is why they get on so well, and multiple episodes cover this realization and dynamic. If you are or have ever been interested in something creative, whether it be writing, music, art, or maybe a lucrative social media icon, remember to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Having creative blocks are part and parcel of the artist's life. You become accustomed to a schedule and deadlines when prior to this you would only create work when you wanted to. There's also an incentive to make money out of this somewhere down the line, because what is capitalism other than an economic model that commodifies human beings through their work output regardless of emotional or artistic integrity?
Well, What are you gonna do, right?
There is a pressure to create content that is groundbreaking or exciting or moving every single time you press upload, and as we see Diane's own deadline marching towards her, she cannot help but crumble from stress and anxiety. And even in spite of how much there is to say about this episode, I myself am undergoing that same struggle creatively. There's no doubt that I see myself in Diane. The social justice-isms, the comfortability and pessimism, it's all very familiar for me. Initially, I was writing an entirely different video essay at first, and I had a big plan with other people coming to voice it who I contacted. Sorry that didn't take off, by the way, for those who I contacted, I know you're watching. The video essay I was making, like Diane's book, was quite intensely personal, as it covered a whole scope of experiences I had during my formative years as a teenager. And I thought the experiences I had were interesting enough to talk about. And they are, but the unrelenting voice telling me the same thoughts Diane heard were extremely difficult to ignore. I never got to the stage Diane did. Luckily, I have a fairly decent grasp when it comes to disengaging with harmful cycles. But every time I looked at this half-done script, I just hated the look of it the more I typed.
Damage isn't interesting and you're unworthy of love.
This was one of the things that ran through my head as I was typing that video essay, and I think at that moment, I knew that the video I was making wasn't going to be a healthy thing for me to do. But many creators are not lucky enough to break out of that habit before it's too late. Artists are taught from a young age that the damage they go through making their art is the part that makes them worthwhile. Your damage made this art possible. Diane says this multiple times. Here,
you just don't want to write this book.
I do, though. It's just hard. But that means it's worthwhile. Good things are hard.
and here.
So, don't write your book of essays.
I have to.
Why?
Because if I don't, that means that all the damage I got isn't good damage. It's just damage. I have gotten nothing out of it, and all those years I was miserable was for nothing.
Also, this bit is just really good writing. I love this scene. It wrongly justifies the bad things people and the world have done to you, because at least you managed to find an outlet on the other side of it, I guess. Diane's thoughts when writing the book have certain recurrent events or ideas, such as the salad bowl that consistently appears, something she clearly wishes to write about. The salad bowl kintsugi thing, for example, is an analogy for her marriage with Mr. Peanut Butter.
The idea behind the Japanese art of kintsugi is that cracks in an object are part of its history.
Diane has a nugget of an idea here, as it's the only part of her drafts that actually has any colour in the art, and one of the only times Diane appears happy with the idea, if only briefly. It's a good analogy, but what does it say beyond that? Unfortunately, it's just that. A nice analogy for her failed marriage. Diane could write a story about each individual crack, but the pressure she endures from Princess Carolyn and her audience doesn't allow for her to explore that in her own time. Moreover, Diane just keeps getting in the way of herself to sound more prophetic than the analogy really is when she writes, but she's doing this in order to do what exactly? We nor Diane know. The expectations from herself just keep mounting higher. Diane has her unresolved feelings about her father, her bullies at school, and Bojack to talk about, but there is no clear foundation for this to be linked together. None of these people knew each other after all. The only thing that does link these memories is Diane herself, and the ongoing depressive mental attitude Diane has towards life in general, with depressive lapses happening more often each time she falls into that spiral. The brain becomes better accustomed to a bad outcome in life. This is no fault of her own, but you could imagine that the brain could begin to feel comfortable in this state after sitting in it for a while. Guy, her boyfriend, notes this in an earlier episode when he gifts her a coat.
And it's not just yourself, because every time you get cold, guess who has to give you his coat?
Oh, sorry. Does that inconvenience you?
No, I just don't know why I should suffer because you have this ideological objection to feeling good.
The gift is literally just a thoughtful idea for a gift because Diane lives in a colder part of the country, I think. I don't live in Chicago. Diane, however, remembers the pain associated with accepting lavish gifts from her time with Mr. Peanut Butter, so the initial, comfortable reaction is to question and reject that gift because of the pain it caused her historically. But this is Guy's gift. It's just a coat he bought for her because she was cold. These triggers and traumas, they're all things that happened to her, but the episode really questions how one can fetishize our own sadness as something beautiful or profound. Yet in reality, they're just things that happen to people. Trauma isn't this grandiose expression of life or an interconnected series of events. It's a thing that happened because Diane's dad was an asshole, or Mr. Peanut Butter led you into a failed marriage. Depression by itself is just a mental illness after all. That was a hot take and a half. It feels sort of gross to say that, as I don't want to invalidate Diane's, my audience's, or even my own feelings to past events. In fact, I feel uncomfortable admitting that past traumas don't shape Diane for the better, but they do follow her around later in life in ways she might not even realise. The general media representation of depression is glorified to the extent we expect a magical story arc to tie up our mental struggles away forever, but in reality it's nothing like that. But maybe that's the point? We're shown the reality of mental illness and its reactions to trauma or triggers. Her body must have a reason to forget and fog up certain events when even she is sure of the feelings she felt in the moment. She remembers being wronged, but the specific concrete information is shut away. How many times have you had someone ask what someone said to upset you, only to suddenly not be able to remember? It's surprisingly common, and it's that fog which only adds on to that self-doubt Diane has when using her trauma to create something that is this emotionally taxing for her. Diane doesn't know how to focus that depression and pain into something creative for her. If she can't even remember the facts, how is she going to be able to write? That's where Ivy Tran comes in. Diane goes to what my British vernacular is hesitant to call the mall in order to focus on her writing, but overhears a conversation from an employee working at the clothing store Trauma. After overhearing a conversation about stolen wallets, Diane, when attempting to write her book, accidentally makes a tangent into this mall detective series using the girl from Trauma as the inspiration for the book. And she's a fully realized idea.
Malls are fun. Or beast, which is slang that young people like me say.
You're a Ivy Tran, right?
Ivy T, that's me.
Smoothly animated and vibrantly coloured, Ivy effortlessly leaps onto the page, kind of literally, and starts telling her story. And it's annoyingly engaging to watch as a creative. Ivy Tran lacks the emotional baggage of Diane and has the charisma and whimsy to carry you through to the end. The narrative hooks are there, the characters are established, and a world we can escape to now suddenly exists. Oh. I see. Escape. Did it have to be so excruciatingly easy? I guess that's what the audience really wanted, wasn't it? Diane's style of writing has always worked best when told through someone else, case in point with Bojack Horseman. But moreover, when you are a creator, you have to translate the themes of your story into something an audience can find digestible. When artists tell stories, it's uncommon to see the narrative depicted through every depressingly minute detail of the artist's life. Diane only asks for the most interesting parts of Bojack's life, and she could distinguish what was good material to use for the book, whereas it's much harder to do that introspectively with a foggy mind. Maybe that's why so few people do autobiographies. So when we cut back to Ivy Tran, this narratively digestible young face, she can tell the themes of Diane's upbringing without exposing the raw damage of her work to kids who aren't ready to hear the raw, unfiltered truth about life. Ivy is still written through Diane, which is pretty clearly implied through how we hear typing sounds as Ivy tells her story, and, well, the computer screen she stares at after she accidentally writes her into existence. I don't know, I just liked hearing the typing sounds, it was a nice touch, let me have this please. This way, she can express herself without sitting inside unresolved traumas that will only send her spiraling if she were to endure them for too long. Just because your book isn't accurately depressing, it doesn't mean you can't make children or your target audience understand and feel those same feelings that Diane yearns for her audience to comprehend. We have Steven Universe, debatably, doing this in a colourful way, for example, and steady progress is being made for children to be exposed to a flawed world so they may feel less alone when living in a world full of broken families and ways in which people other them from society. Diane's initial idea of a treatise on trauma becomes lost as she now commits to writing this book about Ivy Tran. There is a lingering tinge of resentment at herself for not being able to stick to the original idea, but as we saw earlier, it wasn't a healthy thing for her to do. Oh, by the way, if you were wondering what it was I was going to do originally, it was a video about role-playing in World of Warcraft and how I discovered how to express myself and come to terms with my sexuality. I had all these people lined up to voice characters that I actually role-played as to talk about my experiences with other people, as well as the weird in-game racism surrounding roleplay, and it had something of a story behind it. It had a lot of potential, but for whatever reason, my experiences, like Diane's, didn't feel interesting enough to talk about. That, and honestly, there was so much to get out of the way before I even spoke about my story that it became a bit of an inaccessible mess of a script. Good Damage taught me that my work might not turn out how I envisioned it to look, and that is not only okay, but very much a part of many creative processes. But this isn't the most important part of Good Damage for me. You, meaning the person who's watching this video, are the most terrifying thing for me. There lies an expectation from you for me to entertain you as best as I can, else I risk you clicking somewhere else for videos that give you better dopamine hits or more juicy drama from another equally terrified artist trying to gauge your attention long enough for the red bar of your watch time to make it to the end of that screen. What's worse is that, generally speaking, you don't know exactly what it is you want to watch outside of a few set genres and types of YouTube. Princess Carolyn in this episode is a wonderful example of these audience expectations at their worst. When Diane even so much as mentions her idea for the book, Princess Carolyn is immediately intrigued and makes a frightening amount of assumptions for Diane's book.
Yeah, Good Damage. I like it. Send me the pages and I'll get them to the publisher.
Okay, but no hurry.
Okay, but...
Audiences don't generally decline an idea from their preferred artist, and they're willing to listen to most things the artist wishes to express, even if sometimes the audience can encourage mindsets that are kind of insulting in a way.
Diane, sad is the new fun. Besides, the sad is what makes it you.
Really?
Yes.
Imagine being told, yeah, the thing you do well is being sad. I hope Princess Carolyn didn't go to 2014 Depression Tumblr for this bad take. That can apply to most mediums of art available, really. The issue stems from the implicit dialogue from audience to artist. Princess Carolyn, by virtue of observing Diane's work, consents to consume her art, and in return, Diane offers her entertainment services in whatever way that she does. And like any audience in large numbers, Princess Carolyn is an audience member with a lot of power to change this art into something a mass audience can see. Art, in today's world, is undoubtedly transactional. We live in a virtual world where we have a brand of content we sell, the currency being views, and that content has to be consistently similar, else the viewer isn't interested because the thing they clicked on last week is totally different to this week's content. And they're not about your new clothes haul after last week's Totes Hilaire epic fail compilation. Is that something people still say in 2021? Unfortunately, the title, Good Damage, or...
One last thing, and then I swear to God I'll shut up about this forever. A definitive retrospective of the choices we make, people we hurt, the places we go, part 1. Wait, how could it be part 1 if it's definitive?
Immediately boxes Diane into something quite specific by her audience. Whereas, Ivy Tran, Mole Detective, offers a whole universe of possibilities and wacky hijinks that can reliably hold a viewer in for a prolonged period of time. It's why we have to title our videos in certain ways in order for the audience to be hooked and not feel cheated when they find out the video isn't exactly what they thought it would be. The only difference between myself and Diane is still a character. I'm not. My trauma has physically happened. She is funnily enough a story to find comfort in. There are writers and artists behind Good Damage that probably have their own damage to talk about, and they used Diane, like Diane used Ivy Tran, rhyming is cool, to express that damage in their own way. Yeah, that's when you realize that this show's writing is truly something spectacular. As soon as you realize this though, so many of the artists you follow use this technique to express themselves. So what happens when there are successful artists without trauma? Well, I don't know, but we definitely look at them with a tinge of resentment that they made it to the top without much resistance. When you go through so much, the media does tell you that it will all work out towards something in the end, but that is so far from the truth, and Good Damage recognizes this. From there, we internalize and fetishize our own sadness as something we think makes us unique and special, in an unhealthy way. It's why I'm so glad there are people like Guy in the world who will unconditionally and unquestionably support their partner. There's no battle for ego in this relationship. I think it'd be best to conclude that the most important thing outside of you is having a clear support network to fall back onto when things begin to crumble. Whether it comes to a personal emergency with family or online dogpiling, it's become more important than ever for you to have an offline set of people who can care for you when the virtual world becomes too much. We honestly have to juggle these two worlds as a part of life now, virtual and real, so it's no wonder that mental health rates have absolutely soared, especially among younger people. Please know that an artist's trauma or struggles should not be a prerequisite for or an entitlement to success. So don't wear yourself to the bone for your craft just because it feels like you need to have a sad backstory for you to be valid according to industry standards. If anything, the world should probably be happy that there are successful people who are happy without this strange resentment that they didn't suffer enough to get there. I promise, as long as you just keep going, that's all I will ever ask.